Hi, and welcome to this episode of Empowered Entrepreneur. My guest today is Jennifer Campbell, and she is a doula in Reno. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Awesome. It's good to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Why don't we start off by sharing what a doula is and how you're
Oh,
an entrepreneur?
a doula provides emotional, physical, and educational support for pregnant women through prenatal care, birth, and postpartum.
Very cool.
Yes.
And so that is such a unique field. And we would love to hear the story of your why on how you got to where you're at.
I think a lot of doulas go into birth work because of a situation that they've had. You get pregnant the first time and you know nothing, and you go into it blindly, thinking it's going to be all rainbows and unicorns. My first experience, my daughter is almost 32 now, and I was going to deliver at a birth center with a midwife. I always wanted to do home birth and breastfeed, all those things, right? I was very naturally inclined. And my midwife looked at me at 37 weeks gestation and she said, "You can choose this hospital or this hospital, but something's not right. And I need you to transfer care," which was something pretty devastating for me when you really have your heart set on delivering a certain way. And I had this connection with this midwife, but her intuition saved my daughter. So that was a good lesson because I'm very logic based, and that we really need to kind of feel into situations. So I transferred to the hospital. I was living in New England at the time, so I went to Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. I was really blessed because I had an amazing OB, and I delivered her 19 hours after I showed up at the hospital, and he was still there. He was still the doctor on call. So I kept him through the duration of that labor. I had my mom and my sister as support people. My ex-husband, my now ex-husband, was in the military. He wasn't there. And, I was young and I was alone. And my sister actually ended up being a support person through a couple of my labors, several of my labors, but that's where doula comes from. Doula means woman who serves. And traditionally, in a lot of cultures, it's like your auntie or your older sister or your grandmother or a woman who's been through birth before that can support you. So my sister at the time was 18. My mom was there. My mom took incredible notes, but I don't think she was the best person for support. I ended up having a natural delivery, but that doesn't mean that nurses didn't push medication on me. Not as much as I sometimes have seen it in my doula career. But the anesthesiologist came in to give me the epidural, and he started to put the needle in and said, "Hey, she's pushing." And the only reason I didn't get that epidural was because that anesthesiologist was so amazing. So I feel like there were a lot of moments in my labor and delivery that could have gone much differently. My daughter was born. We knew that she was going to be born with issues. They told me if they did the bedside evaluation and handed her back, that was because they were not going to start life-saving procedures and they would allow her to die in my arms. So it was that critical. They did whisk her away, and it took 7 hours for the head neonatologist to come into my room and let me know she was the most critical of 29 babies. If they had known how sick she was, they would have handed her back, because once the hospital starts a life-saving procedure, they can't stop it until there's nothing else they can do. She was on full life support. I couldn't hold her, and they told me that she would not live through her first 72 hours. So I did not leave the hospital. I didn't go to the Ronald McDonald House because I was released at 24 hours, and there was no way I was leaving that hospital till I held my daughter after she had died. So day 3, a nurse found me sleeping in a hallway or in a like a waiting room or something, and she took me to the nurse's station, got me all the stuff, had me shower, brought me to the pump room that I had been using. But again, I'd never seen a breast pump. I didn't know what it was or how to do it right. She called the lactation consultant in, who got me all fitted and hooked up and turned the pump on and touched my leg and said, "Tell me about your birth experience." And I spent 20 minutes sobbing because no one had asked me how I was doing. And 20 minutes later, she turned off the pump. She showed me how to wrap things up and label them. So I knew how to use the pump and store everything and do everything correctly. And she gave me a hug. And that was the night my daughter turned the corner for the better. And I looked at all of these situations retrospectively and thought, all these people were so wonderful. It was a very, very tough situation. I didn't hold my daughter for 7 days. I didn't breastfeed her for almost 3 weeks. It was touch and go for a while. She was released at a month old. She was on monitors at home. You learn as a parent, you get cleared medically to be able to do certain things at home. So she was at home for a couple more months being monitored. So it was a very stressful, hard situation that was overwhelmingly positive. I had these people that were just dropped into that situation. And the moment I walked out of that lactation consultant room and my daughter hit the corner, by the time she was a year old, I was a breastfeeding counselor. I did not want women to feel alone like I felt. I did not want them to feel clueless and not even know what questions to ask. I wanted to be there to educate and support women. And so for 12 years, I was a breastfeeding counselor. I was a lactation consultant with the IBCLC, which is an international organization that's pretty tough to get certified in, get licensed in. And I was a birth assistant for about 7 of those 12 years with a midwifery practice. I did have 3 more deliveries that were at home with midwives that were also super positive, and 2 water births. So I had I had all this experience personally of different scenarios, all that were positive, and working with people that were really fantastic, even in stressful situations. And so for 7 years, I was a birth assistant. And then I moved and I was divorced, and I was a primary caregiver I had 8 children at home at that time. I did foster care and stuff. So I had a pretty big family, and I had to give up birth work because it's not set hours and it's not set pay. And when I became a single mom with these kids, I needed to have set hours and set pay. And I hadn't done anything but birth work for that 12 years. And so I didn't finish my bachelor's degree. And I was thrown into this, getting a job in the corporate world. It was like the lowest low of my adult life. I was getting divorced. My ex-husband was in prison for blue collar crime. I was raising my kids alone. I went from having so many things about my life that I loved in a new location where I knew no one. And I had to give up all of the things that I had loved about my life that I did. And it was really, really tough. I worked up to 4 jobs back then for that first couple of years. And I remember we moved here in 2004, and in 2007 my last certification lapsed. Retrospectively, I should have just figured out a way to keep everything active, because once they lapse, you have to start everything over. But I didn't. I felt like I had to give it up. I gave up all of my little mommy and me statues and all the books. I got rid of everything that was in my house, in my life, that had to do with birth work, because I felt like I had to give it up and I would never be able to go back to it. And it was really devastating. So I gave everything I owned away that had anything to do with birth work. So that's how I got into it, and supporting women through pregnancy, labor, delivery, and postpartum and breastfeeding. And yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of
It was a lot.
resilience.
Oh,
But
thank you. What a compliment. Thank you.
yeah, the resilience that you needed in order to do all of that, to be an entrepreneur, and then you never really stopped being an entrepreneur.
No, I actually, I worked the corporate world for not even maybe 7 years. And then I started a VA business. I was really, really great at running the back end of people's businesses, people's podcasts. But insert thing here, I was really good at it. And I didn't need to work for a certain company. So I started accidentally, kind of at first, started a VA business. And I ran that for 7 years. And it was really successful in the sense that I didn't really ever have to advertise. It was always word of mouth. I got a lot of referrals. I did a lot of coaching in that space with women. So that was great. I got to use kind of the same training that I used for birth work in a different way. And I had this financially successful VA business. I did everything from home. So I had this flexible schedule. I could always be there when my kids got home from school and go to their events. It was a lot easier than working the corporate 9 to 5. And I kind of picked pieces of all the things that I had done to create this business. I didn't love it though, but I was doing bits and pieces of what I had done all the way back as a breastfeeding counselor. But I didn't, being good at something doesn't mean that you love what you do, but I definitely had the entrepreneurial spirit of wanting to set my own days and hours. I'm licensed as a hairdresser still. I haven't been in a salon in a decade, but I did things that where I could earn money and set my own schedule and be my own boss, an independent contractor. So I definitely have always had that spirit in me, that entrepreneurial spirit. But I'm great at cutting hair. I don't love it. I still do all my family, but I found ways to kind of funnel some of that into other things that just weren't as fulfilling, but I got to use some of the same skills.
Yeah, that's really impressive. And I really the idea because I assist with female entrepreneurs
Mm-hmm.
to help them give birth to their companies, to their
Yeah.
organizations that they want, whether they're just starting out or wanting to grow. And it's very empowering to feel their success.
Yeah, and it is, I mean, having children and have gone through labor and delivery, a business is definitely a very similar experience to birth. It is birthing your business for sure. And I think for me, when I was doing the VA and I had my license to be a hairdresser, I was hitting a lot of the markers that were important to me, that flexible schedule, the ability to make money, being my own boss, right? I got a lot of those, but yet the work that I was doing, although I was good at it, wasn't fulfilling. So I love what you do because finding more of those, hitting more of those markers to have something that you also really love that brings you so much passion. That's kind of what I was missing in all of that, right? I was doing a lot of things right, but I was a little off base.
Yeah, I love talking with my clients and seeing what brings them joy and figuring out a way to make that into their business,
Yeah.
making their dreams a reality.
Yeah, I love
And
that.
that's what you did. It took you a while to get there.
It did. 2.5 years ago, my husband and I went on a date. I'm remarried for 10 years now. And it was one of those conversations that's one of the best conversations you've ever had. And he looked at me and he said, if you could be born in any time, what would it be and what would you do? If you could be born in any location, where would it be and what would you do? If you could go back in your life and redo something or do something, if you have that Mr. Destiny, if you could go back and do that one thing differently. And my answer was the same in every situation, but because he was asking me questions where I can't be born in a different time, right? I can't decide I want to be born in the 1800s and hit a reset button. So because these weren't real situations, I wasn't stressed about my answer at all. So his conversation removed me from kind of time and space, and it wasn't real. And so I answered super honestly without even thinking about it. And he looked at me and he said, you would do birth work in every one of those situations. Why aren't you doing it now? You're the happiest person I know, but you don't do anything that fulfills you. Everything you do is for everyone else, whether it's our kids or our family or business. And I remember looking at him and going, you need to understand the Pandora's box that you are opening in this. When I realized what he was doing, I was, oh, I love you. And like, you don't understand. You answered birth work in every single scenario. And the conversation was so light and fun. And I was, well, would you be born? And what would you do? And, it was this back and forth that I didn't realize he was tricking me into admitting what really brought me the most joy in this conversation. And he said, why don't you go back to doing it? And I said, because I decided whatever, at this point, 15 years ago, that I would never be able to go back to it because it's not set hours and it's not set pay. And I shut that off so much that I have never reconsidered it again, even though 3 years prior to this, well, it's been about 4.5 years ago, one of my other daughters had her first baby and she became a doula and a breastfeeding counselor. And she kept saying, Mom, come back and do it with me. And I'd hang up the phone and cry. And it still didn't connect with me. Why don't you just Why don't you have a conversation and go back? Because I had so convinced myself I would never be able to go back. I'd given everything away. I'd shut the door, right? On myself. So when we had this conversation, Olivia's even asking you to go back and be a doula. She lives in Arizona, so we don't do it together, but together, you know. And I'm okay, great, fine. Let's have this conversation. So we would need to go to one income, and I bring in half the income. And he said, well, this is how we can move things around, and that's done. And I said, and I'm going to need to spend money because I have to go through training and certification. I want you to have a plan of what you need, how much, what classes, what you need to do in the time frame, and we'll figure that out. And he did. We did. We went to one income that day. That day, we went to one income. And within 5 months, I was licensed and certified. That first year, we put $6,500 out of our own pocket into my new business. And I didn't earn a dime. So we had this conversation in September, 2.5 years ago. So so last 2022, I was certified in 2022, 5 months later, but I had no paying clients for the rest of that year, the last 7 months of that year. So we went a year and 4 months that I didn't actually get paid at all. And then, 2023, I started getting paid because I put everything into it. So I think, I feel so blessed for what I did that 12 years. And I feel even more grateful and blessed that I had the chance to go back to something that I loved. And then I could retrospectively see my path, right? Because hindsight's 2020, all the VA business and hair cutting and all these things, how it was checking off a whole bunch of the boxes of the birth work that I really wanted to do, but was never really fulfilling. And I was good at it, but I didn't really love it. And it wasn't what I was passionate about. And then I got to go back and do what I'm passionate about. And I've been doing it for 2.5 years now. And I feel so, I guess what I'd like to impress on other people is don't shut the door on yourself. Because I probably would have been open to going back to it years back 7 to 10 years ago when I started the VA business. I would have gone back and done this, but I was spending so much time stressed about having to do the right thing and make the right amount of money and do it the right way that I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. So I think my like unsolicited advice would be not to shut the door on something you love. Like just you're saying, you take people what they're the most passionate about and figure out a way. Well, that's what my husband and I did. I knew what I was the most passionate about. He lit the fire and we figured out a way to do it. And just as another side note, we'd always wanted when a lot of our kids left the house, because we have 18 kids total. And we knew that when we got down to the last couple, we had always wanted to live in an RV full time. We were minimalists and it was fun. And we bought an RV. And our son said, yeah, you can park it in my backyard and you can live in it full time. And that had nothing to do. This was 9 months before this conversation about me going back to birth work, right? And we had decided to move in and we had planned on it. And we had this conversation in September, and the next April we moved in. And again, it wasn't for financial reasons. We figured out how to be a single income family and what things we need to cut out and how we need to switch things around. But the economy shifted a lot 2.5 years ago, and it's gotten more and more expensive, especially where we live in Reno. And because we decided to do that, and one of the side effects of living in an RV was that it reduced our expenses, it made it relaxed and easy for me to launch this business and have no stress financially. And that had nothing to do with it. So, I mean, I guess though the lesson in that is, what are you willing to do to get what you want? Because had I known that we'd have to live in an RV for 2+ years, I'm still in it. If I had known in order to live the life that I wanted to live without financial stress and be able to build my business slowly, you'd have to live in an RV. Would you do it? And I'm here to tell you, yes. I mean, I did it not because of that, but the side effect was that we didn't have any financial stress through that first 15 or 16 months that I didn't make money. So That's a crazy side note to the situation.
That was beautifully said. I was going to ask for some final takeaways, but you left a lot.
Yeah, I think when you really know what you want to do and you're really passionate, I think that's the hardest part. What you're doing with people is figuring out the hardest part, the finding what they love and turning it into a way. It's not a hobby, it's a career, it's a job, it's an entrepreneurial vision, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes you have to move things around in order to get where you want to be. And now that's not an issue because I'm earning money. And also to be open, I thought I was going to pick up where I left off, even though it had been 15 years. You know, I did it for 12 years, took a 15-year break, went back to birth work. I kind of thought I'm going to pick up where I left off. Doesn't that make sense? I know what I was doing. And I'm telling you, if you are open to just being open, now I was the first doula in the state of Nevada to become a Medicaid provider. I am the only doula in the state that works with women who are incarcerated. I'm the only doula right now working with opioid addiction. So I'm working with an entire population of women who have been unserved. They have never had an option to have education, advocacy, physical and emotional support. They felt like they had to do what they were told to do because of the situation they were in, whether it was income or drug use or insert thing here. And I work with the lowest income, most unserved population. And never in a million years, when I started this 2.5 years ago, I thought I'm going to be lighting candles at your home birth. And this is great. And you're going to pay me to be there because that's what I did before. And just be open to being open. And, you know, I'm working with the military too through TRICARE. So it can not look exactly like you think it's going to look, but be more beautiful than you ever imagined if you're just open to being open.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you.